Hi, I'm MR Morrison and welcome to my channel. In the SQL Server training today, I will be sharing with you how you can move from a beginner to a complete pro in SQL Server administration and becoming a database administrator. So we're going to be going from installing your SQL Server, setting up Management Studio, connecting to your database, creating stuff like indexes, how you can tune your database, how to send notification and alerts, and how you can backup and restore your database, and a lot more. So without wasting any more time, let's get right into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is download a SQL Server trial from Microsoft's website. The process that I will be sharing with you to install the server is the exact process that you would follow if you're installing SQL Server within your organization. So let's get right into it. So let's head over to Google and search for SQL Server 2019 because the 2022 edition is not yet released. So I'm just going to be doing a 2019 Developer Edition. So just head over to Microsoft's website and download SQL Server 2019 Developer Edition, which is a free edition. Let me give you a quick overview of the different editions that are available. So there are 5 editions of SQL Server: Enterprise, Standard, Web, Developer, and the Express Edition. The Express Edition is free and you can create database up to 10 gigabytes. The Developer Edition is free and it comprises of all the features of the Enterprise Edition. However, you cannot use this in production within your organization. Now, the Standard Edition delivers basic data management and business intelligence database for departments and small organizations to run their applications, and this is ideal and can work in many organizations. Now, the Enterprise Edition comes with more features and more costs. It delivers comprehensive high-end data center capabilities with blazing fast performance and unlimited virtualization. And as mentioned before, the Standard Edition would be good, but for this tutorial we're going to be using the Developers Edition. So let's go over to the download page of Microsoft website and download now. So once the download is complete, open the file. So here we have 3 installation type: basic, custom, or you can download the media and then install it. So the basic, if you just want to do a quick installation and you don't care about the configuration, then you can go basic. But here we care about the customization, so we're going to do custom, and it will be downloaded directly from the internet. So if you want to download the media and save it for another time, then you can use that option. So I'm going to select custom and proceed. Specify the media location where you want it to be downloaded and then select install. Once the download is completed, you will be seeing this installation center here. So select installation, new standalone installation, or add feature to an existing installation. So you can specify your edition from here. So I'm going to be continuing with the Developer Edition. Accept the license and terms of privacy statement. So here you can select your instance features. We are just interested in the database engine services, so select that and then proceed to next. So by default, the instance name is MS SQL Server, and Windows Server can hold up to a maximum of 50 instances. So you can have like 50 different SQL Server instances running on a single machine. So in that case, if you have a default instance already, then what you do is select name instance and then specify the name of your instance. So I'm going to be keeping the default and select next. So here are the 3 different services that will be installed with the instance: the SQL Server agent, the database server engine, as well as SQL Server browser. So the database engine is set to start up automatically, and the SQL Server agent is manual. So we want to set this as automatic as well. So as the server starts, the agent automatically starts with it. So select next. So on the database engine configuration screen, we're going to be making some configurations for our database server. So we want to enable SQL Server mixed mode authentication. This allows you to have both Windows users as well as local SQL Server accounts for authentication. So I'm going to be setting the password. So your SA user is your server administrator and should not be used for day-to-day administration purposes. It's ideal to create local users or individual Windows accounts for each person who is going to be using the database, and then you give them the relevant access they need. So here I'm just going to add my current user, which will be used for Windows authentication. Now the data directories is another important aspect that you want to configure. So when you request a server in your organization, you will need multiple drives on that server. One for your backups if you're going to store your backups locally, one for your temporary files, and one for your database files. So I'm going to be simulating that using my regular folders on my laptop. So this is my data drive, and then here I will have the D drive, the H drive for temporary files, and my L drive for my log and backup, and within it I have a subdirectory called MSSQL backups and logs. Now let me step back and go to the data, then MSSQL, then data. Your database file will be MDF and your log files will be .ldf. So let's go back to the installation, and then we're going to browse and choose our directory. So the first one is the database directory, change the log directory, the backup directory. And for your temp DB, we're going to be put it in the H drive. Now you can keep the number of temp files as is, because in most cases you won't really need to change them unless you have performance issue and you need a lot of temporary files. So for the maxed out properties, we don't need to touch that. It is automatically calculated for us. Unless you run into performance issues later on, then you won't need to change it. So for the memory, the default is set to utilize everything on your server, but we don't want that. We want a little overhead just in case we have other processes running on the server. So you're going to be capping this based on what is allocated to your server, right? So my laptop now has 32 gig with about 31 available, and I want to set this and say I don't want you to use more than 10 gig of my laptop. But for your organization, that's going to be different. You can use up to like 80, even 85% of your memory. And the minimum amount it's supposed to use here, I'm going to be setting that to 1 gig, which is 1024. So for the file stream, we don't need to enable that. So select next to continue. Select next. So this will take a little while to complete. So the installation is complete. So let's close this. So now that the installation is completed, we now need a management tool that will be used to connect and manage our database. So the default tool from Microsoft is really great. So we're going to be installing SQL Server Management Tools from the Installation Center. So select SQL Server Administration Tool, and it take me right to the website and download. Once the download is complete, just open the executable file. Select install, and this will take a few minutes for the installation to complete. So now that the installation is completed successfully, let's launch Management Studio and connect to our database. So this is the name of my server. If it was a name instance, I would have to do a slash and then specify the instance name. Also, if it wasn't using the default port, then I would have to specify the port which I was connecting to as well. I could also use a period to connect to my instance. It uses SQL Server Authentication to connect to my server. As a database administrator, one of your core functions, as simple as it might sound, is to be able to create, restore, and back up a database, which I will be showing you right now. So expand the database section. select new database, specify the database name, and here it's showing you a few things about the database. The logical file name, the file type, which is rows data, which will be the data file, the MDF file, which I mentioned earlier, and you have the log file, which will be the LDF file. So it's in the primary file group, and its initial size is 8 megabytes, and the auto growth is set to 64 megabyte, and the maximum size is unlimited, and the same thing is for the log. If you look at the path, it specifies D, which is my D drive, the D folder that I created, and the other, and then MSSQL, and then data. Now if you want to change this location, you can always select this little menu icon and then browse for the location where you want to put the database file. In some cases you may be working with limited storage on a database server, right? So let's say the transaction log tend to grow really fast and you want to cap it at a certain limit, but every time you're going to create a database, and you have to come here and then set it manually. So let me show you can do that. You can set the configurations from the model database, and then once you're creating a database, then use the model as like a template and how to create the database. So I'm going to select properties, and I'm going to be setting the size that I want it to be limited to. Let's say I don't want it to go more than say 5,000 megabytes, and I want it to grow at 100 megabytes. So let's select OK, and I'm going to be doing the same thing for the transaction log. The transaction log tends to grow faster, so I'm going to be putting the transaction log at 10,000 and then growth at 200 megabytes. Now select OK, and you can also set the different recovery models here. So you have a full recovery model, and then bulk and simple. I'll be touching those shortly when I'm doing the backup portion of the video. So select OK, and now let's recreate our database. New database, and now as you can see, it inherits the configurations by default. Now select OK. And if you wanted to change the default location of the database file, what you need to do is select properties on the server, select database settings, and then you can change the locations from here. So I'm going to select cancel. Because I don't want to change that right now. So now that we know to create a database, the next step is to know to do a backup. So right click on the database and then backup, and then it will give you the location. It will be saved with that back. So select OK. So let's delete this database and then restore it from the backup to demonstrate all of that. Right click database, select restore database, then browse to the location of the backup file, device. So we're going to select device, browse, add, and then it should be under backup. So this is my demo backup. Select OK, OK, and my database is restored successfully. So now we know how to create a database, we know how to back up a database, and we know how to restore a database. Now, so it's important to know that there are 3 different backup types. So the one I just did is the full backup. You also have a differential backup and a transaction log backup. So as the name suggests, the full backup take a full backup of the database, the differential take only the changes from the last backup, and the transaction log backup takes the backup of what is being held in the transaction log only. Now if your database is in a simple recovery mode, then you can't do a transaction log backup, and without transaction log backup you can't do a point in time restore. You can only do a restore from the last full backup. So the point in time restore, you can restore, for example, at 10:45, 10:50, or 10:53, but you'd have to have transaction log backups running frequently to be able to perform a transaction log, to be able to perform a point in time recovery. So the backup policy within organization will vary. So some may use hourly transaction log backup, some may create transaction log backups every 5 minutes depending on the criticalness of the database. Now remember, this can only be done when the database is in full recovery mode. And for the bulk log recovery mode, it's like a mix between simple and full recovery. So this is ideal when you are doing ETL processes and you have a lot of bulk insert being done. So now that we're able to create a database, backup and do a restore, so now we need to take a look at how we can create logins and users and grant access to our database. So a login is a security principal or entity that can be authenticated by a secure system. Users need a login to connect to the SQL server. Before a login can access a database, it has to be mapped to a database user. So the user is at the database level and the login is at the instance level. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. So in order to create a login, right click on new, login, and then we're going to give the login a name. So let's say test user, right? And then select SQL Server Authentication. So we don't want to enforce any of these policies right now, and these are more advanced methods of authentication. The database will be connected to the master database and it will have a server role as public. By default, all users will have access to the public server role, and I'll be touching on server roles shortly. So specify your password and then hit OK. Now I'm going to be connecting as the test user that I just created. Then I'll try and access the database using the test user. So if I expand the database, you'll realize that the database demo is not accessible. So what we need to do now is have a user at the database level that is mapped to the login that I just created. So create new user. I'm going to specify the name as test user, right? And I'm going to specify the login name that it should map to, which is test user. Now select OK, OK, and OK, right? Let me go back on properties and ensure that it has the ability to read the database. So let's expand again the test user login and let's refresh. Now let me try and access the database. Now I can access the database and do a query on the table. So you have to understand that there's a difference between a login and a user. A user just allows you to get authentication to the server, and then a user allows you to access the database, and the login has to be mapped to a user. Now there's also another type of user which is called a contained user, right? It has a password contained within the database and it's local to the database, so it doesn't need a login. So if we expand database security, right click new user, and then in order to create the contained user, we need to create a user with a password, right? But if you expand the user type, you'll realize that you don't have a create a user with login, because what is happening here is that contained user is not enabled at the on the server as yet. So what we need to do is go to the server, select properties, Then we're going to go to advanced, and then we're going to enable contained databases. So one problem that the contained user solve is the issue with orphan user. You normally have an orphan user when you migrate a database to a server, and then you create the login, and then when you create the login, that user is no longer mapped to the database user by default. You'd have to run a script to remap the login to the user. So with contain user, you don't have to do that. The data and the database user and the password will be automatically migrated. So select OK. Now if I refresh this and then back to databases, select properties, select option, and then now I can enable the partial containment type. Select OK. So to enable contain user on the databases, for new databases you can enable it in the model database and then it will get it from the model, but for existing databases you have to go and enable it manually. So I'm going to select properties, select options, and then I'm going to change the containment type to partial and then select OK. So let me script this out. It's failing, so I'm going to take the database offline and then bring it back online. This happens sometimes because it's still seeing a connection to it. So I'm going to bring it online. So I should have no connection now. And then let me execute the script. So if I go back on properties, it should be set to partial. So now we can create a contained user. So let's expand the database, expand user, expand security, right click new user, and then now we have the option to create a user with a password. So we're going to specify the username as well as the password. Okay, now when you're connecting to the database using a partial user, you have to specify the database that you're connecting to, because if I select connect now, then it will fail. So you have to go to options and specify the database the user is connecting to and select connect, and I should be able to connect. SQL Server provides server roles to help you manage the permissions on the server. So in SQL Server 2019 and previous edition, there were 9 roles. But however, the new edition that will be coming out, which is SQL Server 2022, comes with 10 additional server roles. So let's look at the 9 that is in the SQL Server 2019 and previous editions. So I have the sysadmin role. Members of the sysadmin role can perform any activity on the server. Now the second one is the server admin. Members of a server admin fixed role can change server-wide configuration options and shut down the server. Security admin, as the name suggests, is a fixed server role that can be used to manage logins and their properties, such as they can grant, deny, and revoke server level permissions. They can also grant, deny, and revoke database level permissions. You also have the process admin. So members of the process admin role can end processes that are running on the SQL Server instance. You have the setup admin. So members of the setup admin role can add and remove link servers by using transact SQL statements. You also have the bulk admin role. Members of this role can run bulk insert statement. You also have the disk admin role. Disk admin role is a fixed server role that is used for managing disk files. You have the DB creator role, which is kind of self-explanatory. Members of this role can create, alter, drop, and restore databases. And you have the public role, which we touched on briefly earlier in this course. So whenever a SQL Server principal hasn't been granted or denied a specific permission on a secureable object, the user inherits permission that is granted to public on that specific object. So let's simulate granting a server role to a database login. So here we are connected as the test user. If we try doing a backup with the test user, it should fail. So right click, task, and then select backup. If we select OK, we should get a permission denied in database demo. So let's expand security from the sysadmin user, which is the SA. Expand security. Right click on the user, select properties, and then select server role. Now these are the 9 different roles that we can grant. So we want to grant, say, sysadmin, which can perform all tasks. Select OK. If we go back to the test user connection, select task, do a backup, then it should complete without any issues. So that's pretty much it on securing your SQL server. As part of your role as a database administrator, from time to time you will be required to import and export data from various data sources, and to achieve this you can use SQL Server, Export and Import Wizard. There are 3 different ways you can launch the Import and Export Wizard. The first one, you can go to your Start menu and search for Import and Export, as well as you can use a command line and run the DTS wizard, which will then launch the import and export wizard. And the third option is launching it from SQL Server Management Studio, where you right click on the database, select task, and then export or import data, and it will launch the wizard. So once the wizard is launched, select next. You'll be asked to select a data source. I'll be exporting from my SQL server, which I'm connected to, so select SQL native client. This is my server name and then my database. Then select next, and then also choose your destination. So you have various destinations like an Excel sheet or a flat file. So for the destination, I'll be exporting it to an Excel file. Select the path, file and name, so I'm going to call it test export. Select next, and then you can write a query to do the transfer. You can specify the statement here, as well as you can copy from one or more tables or views. So I'm going to select next, and then I'm going to select a table, so department. You can preview the data, select OK, select next, select next to continue, and then run immediately. Now you can save this as an SSIS package and then execute it using the SQL Server agent job. So you do that if it's a repeated task and you want to have it running over and over. Select next and then finish. So if I go to my documents now, I should be able to see that text file. It's located right here, test export.xls. Now let's simulate doing an import. So I'll be importing it to my demo database. So right click on the database, select task, and then import data. Select next. So this time I'll be choosing my source as a Excel, browse path, and then selecting the Excel sheet, open, select next, and then choose the destination. Now this time it is a SQL server, so I'm going to select SQL Server Native Client 11.0. This is the database, my server name, select next, next, and this is the table, so I'm going to select this one, and I can preview the data as well. Select next and finish to run it immediately. So if we go to our database and refresh, expand tables, then we should be saying the table department. So that's how you'd import and export data using SQL. So that's how you'd import and export data using the import and export data wizard. As part of your role as a database administrator, you will be required to monitor your database. And one way to do this is using SQL Server Mail. By default, SQL Server Mail is disabled. So in order to enable the database mail role, you have to be a part of the database user role. So let's do a demo on how you can enable database mail and send notification using your SQL Server. So let's head back to Management Studio, expand the management, right click on Database Mail, configure Database Mail, select Next, and now it's asking would you like to enable this feature. Select Yes. So you're going to give this profile a name, so you can create different profiles for different purposes. So I'm going to call this test. And you're going to now need to provide a SMTP server information for SQL Server to now use a SMTP server to send that mail. So select Add, specify a name, specify your outgoing server, your sending email address, the display name that you want it to be shown as. If you want, you can specify a reply address, specify your server name, specify your port. So complete all this information, select OK, select Next. So we want to set it as default, select Next, and then Finish. Now we can do a test send mail. So from the database mail again, select Send Test Mail, and then specify the email address that you want to send it to. Once you have completed setting up your mail, you can select Finish. So now that database mail is enabled, you can actually set up custom alerts. So select Expand SQL Server Agent, Expand Alerts, New Alert, and then you can complete and set up an alert based on various parameters. So for example, I'm going to say AdventureWorks database, and I can raise an alert when like insufficient resources occur on the AdventureWorks database, provide a name, and then select OK. So whenever this event happens in the database, it will send you an alert. So now that you have created the alert needs to be sent to someone. So let's select response, select notify operator, and then select create operator. And you can specify the person's name and email address, and then select notification and specify how you want the notification to be sent, and then select OK. And you can view the operator information. I just specify that. OK. You can always troubleshoot an issue with sending a job to an operator. Then you can always troubleshoot using the server log by expanding the logs folder and opening the current log file. Monitoring your database is very important, and there are third-party tools out there that you can use to monitor your database. So in the next module, we'll be looking at how you can schedule a store procedure or schedule any task using the SQL Server Job Agent. The SQL Server Agent is a Microsoft Windows service that executes scheduled administrative tasks called jobs in SQL Server. So for example, if every night you have some data that you want to be inserted in a table, then you can use SQL Server Agent to schedule that task. So let's head over to SQL Server and do a quick demo. So we're going to be inserting data in the test table that we created in the demo database. So right click on the database, and then I'm going to do a script as to insert data. and new query window. So this is going to be generating a script that I can use to insert sample data in my table. So the data I'm going to be entering is just called job schedule. So I'm going to copy this. In order to create the steps, you need to expand the SQL Server agent, right click on the job, select new job, and then give the job a name. So I'm going to call it daily run, and it's ideal to have a dedicated user to execute your jobs. So because I'm just doing a tutorial, I'm using the SA, but the SA should not be used to run jobs. So the first step in creating a job is to create a step. So in this step, you will specify what script or stored procedure you want to execute, or whatever task you want to get completed. And you can have multiple steps in a job. So step 1, you insert some data. In step 2, you could say update some data. And step 3, you could say delete some data. Whatever task you want to achieve, you can do it in various steps. And you can select the database that you want to use from here, as well as you could use this command that says use database. So I'm going to just add step 1 to this text, and I'm going to copy, okay, and I'm going to add another job step. So I'm going to call this step 2. Use demo. Let me go back and check if I select demo on the other database. So on failure, we have various actions that we can select. So what we want to do is quit and report job success or failure. So I'm going to select quit job and report failure. And you can set the amount of times you want the job to retry before it sends the email. So you can specify 1 and select OK. Now you have to set up a schedule for the job to run on. You can create one schedule, and that one schedule is used by multiple jobs. Select new. I'm going to say daily. For the schedule type, you can specify when you want it to run. So I'm going to say recurring, and I want it to be executed daily, and the specific time that you want it to execute. And you can also set an end date for this job. So I'm going to select the 31st for the end date as well. Select OK. So if the job fails and you want to send alert, you have to set up the notifications and enable the email option. And then this was the test operator that we created over here. This operator here. So I'm going to select when the job completes, but most likely you want to send the email when the job fails. So I'm going to select that and select OK. So at midnight, this job will be executed. So you can also do a manual run, which I'm going to do now, and start at step, run. So it failed for some reason. So let's see why it failed. These are things that you'll actually meet on a daily basis. So I have to view the job history, view history. So the job failed because the data I'm trying to enter into dbo.test is larger than the value. So I need to alter the column and change the value to a larger size so it does not show an error. So if we execute the job again, it should complete without any issues. Start job at step, start. Now, so the expected result is that we should be seeing 2 records in the table. Select 1000 row, and we have a job step 1 and job step 1. The other step should have been renamed to job step 2. And that's how you'd schedule a job using the SQL Server job agent, and you can use it to do a lot of automation. In the next section of this video, we're going to be discussing how you can create index and use it to improve the performance of queries. Index is one of the ways that you can use to increase the performance of a query. If you're new to SQL Server, you might need to be aware there are different types of indexes, and I will be touching them briefly. So the first one is the clustered index. A clustered index sorts and stores the data rows of the table or view in order based on the clustered index key. So these are mainly on primary keys. Then you have the non-clustered index, which is another very popular index. A non-clustered index can be defined on a table or view or on a heap. Each index row in the non-clustered index contains the non-clustered key value and row locator. The row locator points to the data row in the clustered index or heap having the key value. It's important to note that the rows in the index are stored in order of the index key value. Unlike for the clustered index, it is stored based on the clustered index key. You also have a unique index. A unique index ensures that the index key contains no duplicate values, and therefore every row in the table or view in some way unique. You also have the column store index. Now column store indexes work well for data warehousing workloads that primarily perform bulk operations that are mainly read-only queries. Next we have the XML index. XML indexes are a special type of index that can be created on XML type columns. We also have the SQL Server full text indexes. A full text index is a special type of index that produces indexing support for full text queries. These special type of indexes can be created on binary character based columns as well. They are different from your standard index types in that instead of using the entire column as the index key, the column data is broken up into tokens, and these tokens are what is used to build the index as a predicate when navigating the index structure. And these are some of the more common types of index. So let's head over to Management Studio for a demo. Now there are two ways you can do this. You can actually use a script, or you can do it using the graphical user interface. So I'm going to simulate this using the graphical user interface. So the first step is to identify the table that you want to create the index on. So I'm going to create one on the departments table. So expand the table and then right click on indexes, new index, and then we're going to be creating a non-clustered index. Specify the index name and then add the columns you want to include in your index. So you can add multiple columns in your index. So I'm going to select group name and name. Okay, and then I'm going to script to a new query window so you can see the actual syntax for creating the index. Select OK and it will create the index. So if you refresh, it should be seeing the index that I just created. So this is the syntax for creating an index. You have the index name, the table that you want to create the index on, the columns you want to include in your index, and that's pretty much it. You don't need this part of it. So for example, if it was a large table and you're doing a query and the group name is involved and you say where group name equal a specific value, then that query will be executed faster with the index. Now if you have an index that is heavily utilized, you may want to rebuild your index nightly or on a weekend depending on the size of the database. So you have two options. You can reorganize or rebuild. So when you're rebuilding the index will become unavailable. When you're doing the reorganize, the index will be available online. However, in the later versions of SQL Server, you can rebuild index with the option to resume. I'll be touching on those in later videos. So if you're supposed to right click on index you create, you'll see the option to reorganize and rebuild. When your index becomes fragmented, then your performance is reduced. So if it's very fragmented, like say 80%, then your speed of your query will be reduced significantly. So it's good to maintain your indexes, and you want to put that on a schedule by creating a maintenance plan and then schedule that maintenance plan using the SQL Server agent. Welcome to the end of part 1 of a 2-part series. In part 2, we'll be covering some essential topic that can give you a practical experience before you land your job as a database administrator. So make sure you stick around for part 2. That's it for now, guys. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.